You think hard work makes you valuable, but the truth is it often makes you replaceable. You've seen it. You filed a complaint about someone who clearly wasn't doing their job. Nothing happened. You sat in meetings where everyone knew who the weak link was, but management acted blind. You watched someone repeat the same mistake over and over, while you got called out for one small slip. And the part that really got to you, no one ever explained why. So you started questioning yourself. Maybe you were wrong. Maybe you didn't see the full picture. Maybe there was something behind the scenes you didn't understand. But you weren't missing information. You were missing the rule. Because in most companies, people are not judged by how well they perform. They are judged by how inconvenient they are to remove. That's it. When you complain about someone, you think you're pointing out a performance issue. But what you're actually doing is asking management to do more work. And here's the reality, no one tells you. Management doesn't solve problems unless ignoring them becomes more expensive than fixing them. So every time you raised your voice, someone above you made a calculation. Not about fairness, not about who's right, not about who deserves consequences. A simple question. If we remove this person, what lands on my desk? Who has to step in? Who has to train someone new? What breaks in the process? How much time will this cost me personally? And if the answer is too much work, nothing happens. The complaint gets acknowledged, filed, and quietly ignored because that employee you're frustrated with. They're not being protected because they're good. They're being protected because they're convenient. Firing them requires effort. Keeping them requires tolerance, and tolerance is cheaper. That's the rule, and once you see it, everything starts to make sense. You think bad employees survive because of favoritism. Reality, they survive because removing them creates friction. You think hard workers get rewarded. Reality, they get loaded with more responsibility. You think performance drives decisions. Reality, workload drives decisions. If this hits, comment 1 below, because here's where it gets deeper. You've probably noticed something strange. The person who works harder gets less patience. The person who barely functions gets more. That never made sense to you. Until now. Reliable people create expectations. Unreliable people lower them. When you consistently deliver, you become the standard. And once you become the standard, management has a problem. Because now they either have to push everyone else up to your level or explain why they're not. And pushing people is hard. Holding standards is uncomfortable. It creates tension. So instead, they lower the bar. The underperformer trains management to expect less. And expecting less is easier than enforcing more. So when you mess up, it stands out because it violates the standard you created. But when they mess up, it blends in because it matches the expectation they set. You're being judged by your peak. They're being judged by their baseline, and their baseline is low. That's why you feel like you're under a microscope while they're invisible. That's not unfairness. That's calibration. And here's the part that changes everything. At some point you adapted. You stopped trying to fix them. You started working around them. You picked up extra tasks. You double-checked their work. You avoided relying on them entirely. You told yourself you were being professional, responsible, a team player. But what you were really doing was covering a problem that management should have been forced to solve. You removed the pressure. And when you remove the pressure, nothing changes. You didn't expose the system. You stabilized it. You became the buffer, the shock absorber, the invisible fix. And that's where the trap closes. Because now you're not just doing your job. You're doing part of theirs too. And the system quietly adjusts around that. They stay. You stretch. They relax. You burn. This is the hidden consequence no one talks about. The worse someone performs, the more the system reshapes itself to tolerate them. And the better you perform, the more the system reshapes itself to depend on you. That's not meritocracy. That's load distribution. And here's the brutal truth about how companies actually operate. They don't optimize for excellence. They optimize for stability. They don't reward the best. They protect what's hardest to disrupt. The person who documents everything trains others, shares knowledge, becomes easy to replace. The person who hoards information builds dependency, creates chaos, becomes risky to remove. So when layoffs happen, it's not about who's better. It's about who creates more problems by leaving. 2 lists get made. One list people whose absence causes immediate disruption. The other people whose work can be redistributed quietly. Guess which list survives? The first one, and that's why you've seen it. The competent person gets cut. The dysfunctional one stays. Not because they're valuable, because they're embedded. Because removing them creates pain for management, and avoiding pain is the real priority, not performance, not fairness, not logic. Convenience. Always convenience. You've been playing a game where the rules were never explained. You thought doing more would protect you. You thought being better would secure your position. But in this system, being better often just makes you easier to rely on. And easier to rely on means easier to exploit. That's why you feel stuck. That's why nothing changes. That's why the same people keep getting away with the same things. Because the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And once you understand that, you stop asking the wrong questions. You stop asking, why don't they fix this? And start asking, what incentive do they have to fix this? Because if the answer is none, then nothing will change. No matter how right you are, no matter how obvious the problem is, no matter how many times you point it out. And if you don't adjust, you become the one paying the price, slowly, quietly, until burnout hits, until frustration builds, until you either leave or break. Meanwhile, the person you've been frustrated with, they survive because they learned a different strategy. They didn't try to carry the system. They learned how to exist inside it. And that's the uncomfortable shift you have to make. Stop thinking in terms of effort. Start thinking in terms of leverage. Stop asking how to do more. Start asking what happens if you do less. Stop solving problems that aren't yours. Let the system feel the weight it's been avoiding. Because as long as you keep compensating, nothing will force change. You don't need to become incompetent, but you do need to stop over-functioning. You don't need to sabotage anything, but you do need to stop rescuing everything. Because every time you fix what isn't your responsibility, you reinforce the exact system that's holding you back. And the longer you do that, the harder it becomes to escape. In the end, this isn't about them. It's about you understanding the environment you're in. Because once you see the rules clearly, you stop playing blindly. And when you stop playing blindly, you stop losing in silence. If this changed how you see your job, consider subscribing.